The following interview was part of the research carried out for an episode of Imagining Tomorrow, a hope-filled podcast made in partnership with Friends of the Earth. A link to the episode can be found in the video notes, or you can go to foe.uk/Imagining Tomorrow to find all of the episodes released so far. Enjoy! Hi, thank you so much for giving me your time today. I was wondering if you could introduce yourself and tell me where you're from.
Sure. My name is Matt Chlebek, and I am the Chief Scientific Officer and co-founder at Harvest London, which is based in London. I live here, work here, yeah.
So your Harvest London, your company is a vertical farming enterprise, which I am absolutely fascinated with. Would you be able to give us an overview of how it works, like how the plants get their nutrients? Just an overview of the process.
Of course. So vertical farming is, I suppose, the combination of a number of different technologies. You're using what's called hydroponics to feed the plants. So that's growing the plants without soil, in water. The water is the sort of the vector for delivering all the nutrients the plants need. Then we also use LED lights. So I think the reason that the way we grow what we grow can be done now in a cost-effective way is because of the developments in lighting technology, specifically LED lights. So they're more energy efficient, they run cooler. So LED lights are more energy efficient, and then we combine the hydroponics and the LED lights and essentially, warehousing, I suppose, to stack the plants in layers on top of each other. So in a given footprint, we can pack more plants in because we can go up. And then sort of around that is an element of quite sophisticated climate control as well. So seeing as you're growing the plants inside, you might as well provide them with the perfect environment as well to ensure the best growth. So that's kind of what we do. And then outside of that, it's quite a lot of sort of traditional horticulture stuff, really. A lot of pipes and water flowing and tanks and valves and clever bits of computer systems that control all of that. But really, it's about taking sort of technology that already exists and combining it in a relatively novel way. And, just giving the plants exactly what they want all year round.
Fantastic. So with the nutrients, they're added to the water.
Yeah.
So is it like powders? Is it, because I'm thinking about aquaponics where you have the waste from fish and that provides the nutrients, but you put the nutrients in yourselves.
Yeah. And I mean, so what as I said, sort of what we're doing is not necessarily anything particularly novel. So a big glass house that grows lettuces, a lot of those have been using hydroponics for a very long time. They've just been growing lettuces in floating rafts on big ponds, and those ponds have got to have some level of nutrient in. So there's plenty of people out there who will sell you a nutrient blend, a fertilizer blend essentially, for water as opposed to for soil. It's that you can go very, very deep into that and start mixing your own concoctions and all that sort of stuff. I mean, the key thing for what we do is that the water is recirculated and recaptured. So whilst the water comes in just from the tap, essentially from the tap water, which has got some stuff in it that plants can use. So you've already got a little bit of a head start there. You have to add an amount of nutrient to that water. And a couple of other things as well to keep the water healthy. And then when that water is, unlike in a field where if you were to spray fertilizer on the field, it would then run off into the wider environment. We recapture it all and recirculate it around. So the plants get watered, the water drains off, goes back to the tank. The plants get watered, water drains off, goes back to the tank. Something like aquaponics does allow you to sort of generate that nutrient content for free, but it also comes with its own problems. One being you've got to look after a bunch of fish, and the other is that when you start adding organic matter and carbon into your water system, it means a lot more things can go wrong because you've got a lot more stuff for bad bugs and things you don't want to feed on. So there's a it's a pretty well established method. It is nothing, if you anyone who's worked in the sort of agriculture industry would recognize what we're doing, because this has been going on for a very, very long time to grow, things like tomatoes and lettuces, etc., for a very long time.
So, what led you to found Harvest London? What was your route into this?
The route into it, I suppose, is very different to the reason why. I suppose. I mean, my educational background's in plant biology and plant genetics, but then I worked in the music industry for quite a long time, because I don't know, out of university, you don't necessarily do the first thing that you plan doing. And then the true story of it is that my wife is in a band with the person who cuts my co-founder's hair. And that's how me and Chris, my other co-founder, met. And he was looking to start a vertical farming business and was just asking around if anyone knew anyone sciencey, I suppose. And I, for a while, had been wanting to have a change of career, and wanted to do something, which is not the first time this has happened in my life. Wanted to go back into something more science-based, something where, like learning is the sort of key part of it. And I suppose that the reason that I think for me, the combination of the official plant science education alongside, my mum being a keen gardener as I was growing up, and my dad was an engineer, so I grew up fixing things. So I'm not afraid to use a screwdriver in the same way as I'm not afraid to, watch a plant a seed. And that's been really key for us, because what we do is as much horticulture as it is engineering, as much agriculture as it is engineering, especially when we're small. I mean, it was right at the start, it was just me doing all of the growing, all of the maintenance, all of the engineering. As we've grown, as the company's grown, we've now got people to help with that, or to help me with that, I suppose. So yeah, and it was just, I think the reason for it is that for me personally, I wanted to do something new and interesting, and I wanted to work in something where I could use, I could learn stuff in a way that was kind of on my own terms, because I think it's, I mean, look, in a selfish way, I live in London, and all the jobs in science are out in Oxford and Cambridge, right? And I didn't want to commute out there, so we just sort of did it ourselves. So I've sort of snuck in, without without having to go that route. So yeah, and I think in a wider sense, I think it's something that we even saw back then was helping to solve a problem, and I think that has become more and more apparent over time that what we're doing is needed, I suppose. But it was also, I mean, we started off just growing. Well, I mean, I'm sure we'll cover this later, but we started off growing the weirdest, strangest, most unique herbs and leafy greens that we could find for chefs, and it was just because we were also really into food and really fascinated by where it all came from, and the wide choice of stuff out there that isn't necessarily available from your standard wholesaler. Things have changed a little bit since then, because you've kind of got to grow what people want to buy, and you don't want to end up with 2 kilos of Peruvian mint in your fridge that no one knows what to do with. But yeah, I think it was all those things kind of conspired together to allow us to start it and keep going with it. And it's taken a while, and there's been a lot of sort of sacrifice along the way, I suppose. But we're in a good place now.
Excellent. Which crops are you growing at the moment? Is there less Peruvian mint now?
Yes, unfortunately there is. We've grown hundreds of different varieties of things over time. Everything from, lettuce to Peruvian mint to radishes and carrots and nasturtiums and anything else that I would have thrown in there, flowers and exotic herbs and all sorts of stuff. Now, because we have to be a business, because fundamentally we've got to pay people's wages and all that sort of stuff, we go where the market goes. So we grow a lot of basil, Italian basil and Thai basil. We grow those two. And then we grow a sort of big mix of baby leaf salad, And then we also have a bunch of crops that we're working on for the next stage of our business, which is a sort of broader range of our crops. But we're sold out. We're out of space. We have to turn customers away. We're full. We're constantly full. What we try and do is with the stage that I don't know if I'm sort of skipping ahead here, but we started off, the first place that we built was kind of in a sort of brick shed above an MOT garage in Walthamstow. We sold that out. We were selling to a handful of small restaurants. Then we built the current farm that we're in, which is much, much more technologically advanced, much more food safe, much more controlled. And our customers sort of grew with us. And originally, the main customer for the farm was Pizza Pilgrims, which is a chain of pizza restaurants in London. And their issue they were facing is that if they put basil on the pizza, and each time they got a basil delivery, it was different, because some months of the year it would come from the hills of Italy in Liguria, which is the real, cream of the crop stuff. But for the rest of the months of the year, when it wasn't lovely weather there, it was coming from anywhere between Ethiopia, Israel, Spain, etc. So the list goes on. And each of those countries grows the basil in a slightly different way, a slightly different variety. It has to travel a long way. They were just not getting a consistent product. And so we came in and said, we'll give you exactly the same day on day, all year round, which is kind of how the relationship with them started. And then since then, we've expanded our customers. We do less now, but we used to do a lot of sort of trendy Thai restaurants who are looking for Thai ingredients that you just can't get from your average wholesaler here in London or here in the UK. Have to be imported. It's a long distance. The quality goes down, etc., etc. Which I think, I'm sure it's something we'll talk about later, about those advantages of the way we grow stuff. So we try, what we're trying to do is the reality is a huge amount of the produce that we eat is imported, because we don't eat seasonally, which is it'd be great if we could all grow our own food in the back garden and eat tomatoes in the summer and cabbages in the winter, and no one wanted tomatoes in winter unless they were from a can, etc., etc. But that's not how it works, unfortunately. So we try, we're looking at providing that product that is usually imported, which is actually a huge amount of stuff. There's no point us competing with British growers on a wide number of crops, because they'll grow it outdoors for not free, but certainly the light's free in the summer in the right times. And there's a huge amount of other stuff that goes into it. There is thinking of things like lettuce, for example, which I know is like, it's just a lettuce, but so much has gone into it so far from the industry in terms of how the glass houses that grow lettuce operates, and how they've worked out ways to extend that growing season. But it relies on energy prices being reasonable, or the price of inputs being reasonable. And there's these the market forces that influence whether or not you can grow a lettuce in a glass house are mind-boggling. So we don't try and compete with stuff that you can grow in open field here, because there's just no point. But the customers that we do grow for want a consistent product. They want a bit of influence on their product as well. So whether that be, we want our salad leaves to be this big, not this big, or we want them to taste this way, not this way, or we want a bit more red in the salad mix, a bit less green in the salad mix, or really they want good shelf life, which we offer much better shelf life because of where we grow it, how we deliver it. The basil, for example, you want that sort of classic Italian cupped leaf, not the sort of weirder varieties that are grown elsewhere with a sort of flat leaf with a serrated edge. Like, it doesn't quite look like you imagine basil to look like in your head. There's all sorts of things that people want to come to us for. But yeah, I'll grow anything if people will buy it. That's what we like doing.
So when we've already kind of touched upon some of them, once the business is established, what I'd like to do is to talk about the environmental benefits. I mean, the reduced water use is obviously one we've already mentioned. So what are the benefits, looking at it in terms of the wider picture to the environment?
So it is a very, very hard thing to quantify, especially because the supply chains involved in importing fresh produce are so long and opaque. But there's certain things that we know for a fact. And one is that, yeah, we use less water. We use a lot less water than open field. And there was a point in time where you might be able to ignore that, and you might be able to say, well, that's not that important. But it's becoming more and more important, as the world gets worse, it's becoming more and more important. The weather that Southern Europe is experiencing at the moment is going to cause shortages on our shelves in September, October this year. Like, it's just going to happen because everything's dying. So we use less water, which is good. As a result, we don't necessarily use less fertilizer per kilogram of crop because the plants still need to grow in the same way, but we definitely waste less because we're recapturing the water. So the majority of the fertilizer we use is used by the crop as opposed to by the crop and then off somewhere else. The supply chain for us is much, much shorter now at the moment because of the scale we're at. All of our delivery is on bikes, and we cut down, the team that's in the farm today would have done a harvest this morning, and it will be in the kitchens 4 hours later, which is pretty unheard of. It's great for the chefs. Obviously, as you expand throughout the country and depending on what your customer base is, that changes. But it's UK grown, which is a lot more than could be said for a lot of other stuff that we eat a lot of the year round. We don't use pesticides, which is good. And I think that there's a sort of maybe a misconception out there that things like organic farming doesn't use any pesticides, which is not true. But we don't, which I think is probably, in the grand scheme of things, a good thing. Just because we don't have to. It's a closed environment. The bugs don't get in. We don't need to get rid of them. There was something else that I was, we don't use single-use plastic really at the moment. That's just by nature of who our customers are. We sell in these big reusable, returnable plastic crates that we pick up and wash out. I think, again, as the business expands to cater to retail and to customers, that plastic thing becomes a bit unavoidable because plastic is very, very good at keeping crops fresh, and there aren't that many alternatives out there that supermarkets will accept because the supermarkets have their own interests in what is stocked on their shelves in terms of the packaging. No pesticides. There was one other as well that I usually remember because we talk about this sort of thing a lot, but I think I've forgotten now.
It may come back to us.
Yeah, it'll come back to me. Yeah.
So one of the things that when I've been reading about vertical farming, there's been a lot of emphasis on leafy greens being what's grown by a lot of businesses. And that's presumably because of, as you've mentioned before, the market demands and profitability. Is it possible to grow calorie dense? Think you could literally grow anything? There's no restriction in terms of the method used?
I think that so the one of the reasons that you grow leafy greens in vertical farming is they grow quick and they're easy. They're really pretty easy. I mean, getting them perfect is a challenge, but you can, much like you do as a kid when you grow cress on damp tissue paper. I mean, that's it, right? That's that mustard cress becomes a salad leaf, essentially. It's pretty easy. The other reason you do it, you're right, is because of the market, but the market is one that focuses on or has to rely on importing a large amount of the year. So from a sort of, even just from a conceptual standpoint, the herbs and the leafies make sense. They're fragile, yet they get imported. We operate a vertical farm at the moment, and we will continue to operate vertical farms, but really we see ourselves as a controlled environment agriculture company. And what that means is that vertical farms make sense for plants that are that tall because you can do lots of levels, but tomato plants are 6 foot tall. Does it make sense to grow them in a vertical farm? Probably not, but it does make sense to grow them in a super high-tech glass house, which you can still get the same energy benefit. You can still get a lot of the same benefits from. Your architecture is different, your engineering is different. Things like potatoes and wheat and rice, we don't really have a problem growing. That's the thing, is yes, the climate is affecting these crops, but not in the same way as it is affecting fruits and leafy veg, And so I think the first thing, whilst we still can, because who can say what will happen in the future, but whilst we still can, it's more about shifting that production, shifting what production can be shifted indoors to make more room outdoors for anything from rewilding to growing more wheat and potatoes to whatever you want to do. Um, Fortunately, we're not in a position right now where, at least in this country, where it's we can't grow anything outdoors, of course. But I think it's about looking at the vertical farming is like one piece of this puzzle of how we provide food, not the solution to everything. However, plants do grow pretty well in a lot of situations, and we happen to have a very good situation. It's really just about the speed. And something like wheat. I mean, I've seen people grow potatoes in a similar method. I've grown radishes. Radishes grow very quick, so they make sense. Potatoes take a lot longer to grow. You can speed that up with breeding and all sorts of other things. But really, it's again about what's economically viable and where the shortages are and what is difficult to do outside and what can be brought inside. Yes, I don't think you're going to feed a nation on lettuce, but green leafy vegetables are important to people's diets. Whether that's a lovely, beautiful red butterhead lettuce or a spinach or a kale or just a a summer green or whatever. And the reality is people like eating them and people like a varied diet. We're very fortunate to be able to demand that varied diet. But still, tomatoes are really good for you. And kale's really good for you. And so I think there is a place for all of these things to exist alongside each other. And hopefully we don't get to a point where we have to crack growing wheat in a vertical farm in the next 3 years, right? That's the hope, that you can do these two things simultaneously and or take bits of learning from what we do and apply it to other methods of growing, for example.
I mean, I was going to ask you about that actually, about where you see holistically, if you look at food production in the UK, how you see it all working together. And yeah, it's very clear from what you've said that this isn't a replacement, that this is complementary and one piece of the system. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, as a science fiction author, then your mind might go to, well, then what do we do in space? And the answer is, I don't know what we do, because there is a totally different pressure there, because
Gravity,
there's no air.
and
So that's like yeah. So but then maybe the pressures are different. If you can get a vast amount of energy for free because you've got no clouds, for example, then maybe the 3 months, whatever it takes to grow wheat indoors, wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, interesting. So your vertical farms use renewable energy. Have you been
Yes.
able to make that work during the British winter? Because that's
Yeah.
the obvious challenge with solar. How have you dealt with that?
I mean, it's solar and wind. So the energy partners we work with diversify enough so that they can guarantee us renewable energy. One of an advantage we have is that everyone doing everything uses energy, unfortunately, and whether that's a tractor filled with diesel or a glass house that's heated with a gas boiler over the winter. I think one of the big problems that happened when energy prices went berserk recently, for reasons that we're all aware of, was that a lot of glass house growers had to shut down in the colder months because they couldn't afford to heat their glass houses. Our heating bill isn't big because our lights produce a lot of heat and really we're trying to cool. And there's different pressures on the cost of electricity and the cost of gas. And very fortunately, we sort of fixed our energy price at a good time. When you get to a certain scale, you can start making deals with energy providers that allow you to buy cheaper energy in bulk, essentially. They allow you to do things that I really don't understand about hedging energy prices in the future and all this sort of stuff that very smart people do. So it's difficult at a small scale. As you scale up, there are things already in place for large industry that needs surety on energy that we just don't think about all the time. But whether it's a vertical farm or I don't know, food packing plant or a car manufacturer or a steel maker, they all need large amounts of energy. And there's been things in place for a very long time that you and I don't see unless you get involved in it for securing that energy supply in a way that hopefully doesn't bankrupt you. Um, the we're an energy intensive business, but a lot of other businesses are energy intensive, and as long as you work with people on it, the energy supply isn't really an issue for us. Um, it's also about being very good at how, what time of day you use that lighting, because energy prices fluctuate over the day, how much you're running at night versus during the day. Can you turn the lights off for a little bit long? Can you turn the lights off for a little bit longer when prices are high? Leave them on for a little bit longer when prices are low. It all helps. It's something we're getting better at as we get the sort of knowledge in our team to be able to do that sort of stuff. But it is a challenge, and it's been a challenge to a lot of people. But unfortunately, it gets easier the bigger you get.
Do you think that there's greater resilience because you only require electricity rather than needing gas as well? Is that a benefit?
Um, I mean, obviously, the benefit is electricity allows us to be renewable, whereas
Mm.
gas does not. There are some funny things that go on in this country about how renewables are priced versus how gas is priced. They don't move independently of each other, which they should, but they don't. Um, so it helps, but not. It could help a lot. It could be a hell of a lot easier. We only have one energy bill to think about, which is our electricity bill, as opposed to our energy bill and our gas bill, which simplifies things a bit. But there's all sorts of things about how the efficiency of your cooling works depending on what you're powering with and all this sort of stuff that you can spend a lifetime learning about if you're that kind of person. Um, so yeah, it's there's good bits and bad bits about it. Really, you want to be. Someone was saying this to me the other day. Is it's one thing going to a wind farm that already exists and say, "Can I buy your power off you?" It's another thing needing so much power that someone's willing to build you a wind farm that didn't exist before, because that's the real thing, right? You want to build something so big that someone goes, wow, building a wind farm to power this is totally worth it, because then that energy generation didn't already exist in the grid. And the grid is getting more and more renewable as time goes on. Some days it's 100% renewable on those windy sunny days. So getting renewable energy is becoming easier. Paying for it is not necessarily getting easier, but hopefully will over time.
Okay. I'm just looking at, yes. So one of the things I was curious about, there's been a lot of coverage in the press about how Brexit has had an impact on seasonal workers, and that a lot of farmers that use fields are
Yeah.
really struggling to recruit pickers and people
Mm.
at certain times of year. I was wondering, in your model of farming, does it have less demand in terms of
Yeah.
that kind of labour? Is there more automation?
I mean, we horticultural automation again. We're not using anything novel particularly. We're just sort of gluing it together in novel ways. So there are machines out there that, I mean, we have one currently. It's actually in our current farm, the only horticultural automation we have, which is there are machines out there that will plant seeds for you. And that's not where people have problems anyway. Planting seeds in a field is, you do that with your tractor. But,
Yeah.
we have there's a seeding machine. We have to do a process called transplanting, which is where you grow the plants very close together when they're little, space them out as they get older. We do that by hand, but that can be, there's machines that have existed for a very long time that do that. For us, harvesting is a by hand process at the moment, and all of our staff are basically local to the farm, or so again, we're not having that seasonal problem because we don't have seasons as well. So our staff are employed year round because they're harvesting every day, which is nice. But the harvesting machines, so what we do, exist, and in our next site, which is going to be vastly bigger than our current site, everything will be automated end to end. So from seeding all the way through to harvest, it's not being touched by a human hand. So the humans that are there to make sure the equipment is working correctly, and to make sure that the inputs to the system are correct, but we don't need anyone. And all the bagging and packing will also be automated. I think the thing with field agriculture, and I'm no expert on this side of it, is that because you have seasons, you can't keep people employed year round. There are some crops are easier to automate than others, and obviously automation is expensive at the front end. So, do you? Yeah, I mean, berries are a good example, right? Berries are really, really hard to pick with a machine accurately and efficiently. People are trying to do it, and I think strides are being made in it, but it's a really tough job because they hide behind stuff and they're different shapes and they're fragile and all this sort of stuff. So if you're running a strawberry farm, it's historically just been impossible to automate that process, and it's not been that hard to find people to come who are willing to pick those strawberries. As it becomes more difficult, I think people will find themselves in a difficult situation, which is if you can't find the staff, what do you do about your crop if you can't pick your crop? If you can't pick your crop, you then can't earn the money to invest in the machinery to solve that problem, which is a very difficult thing to position to find yourself in. People like organizations like DEFRA have grants to fund these sorts of things, but again, if the machinery doesn't even exist, what are you going to do? I think it's different on a crop by crop basis. I think the crops that have been, what's it like carrots? The carrots that are grown in the field, you've got an attachment on the back of your combine harvester that just sort of scoops them up, and they go up on a very simple conveyor belt and washed and whatever else needs to do. But yeah, things like fruits and stuff are a really hard challenge. And I don't, it's definitely beyond me to solve that problem. Labour is a big cost in agriculture. It's inescapable, and also we go for, one of our selling points is the consistency of the product, right? Like it's the same every day. There's no damage, and so automation helps with that as well, because the less you can handle it, the better. So yeah, I mean, look, we're small in comparison to in comparison to a lot of open field growers. But we had a lot of problems during COVID, of course. Brexit hasn't affected us in terms of staffing particularly, but COVID affected us in terms of staffing, affected our customers as well. If it's not one thing, it's another thing at the moment. What Brexit has, how Brexit has affected our industry, unfortunately, is it's actually kind of had this difficult thing where, as things get worse, what we do becomes more necessary. So if you can't get lettuces over the border, if you can't get basil over the border, it makes sense to grow it here. And if it's December, the kind of only way to do it is doing what we do.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I can see a real benefit to your geographical location in that you have a high density of businesses like the pizza restaurants that need your produce. One of the things I was curious about is how easy it is to, if you're in a city, how easy it is to get planning permission to have something like a vertical farming enterprise. Are there big barriers to doing something like this?
Not really. Planning permission is only about external works. So with us, the only external stuff is what's called chillers on the outside of the building. It's what air conditioners on the outside of the building, which are everywhere. Planning is also involved in what's called like use case of a building. So if your building was an office building and you want to turn it into manufacturing, that can be tricky. So you just go and find a building that's been zoned for manufacturing and happy days. One thing that I think is a nuance of this and an unfortunate thing that we are trying to navigate through is if you're if you're a farm, you have very, very different business rates than if you're another business. They're basically zero. Um, and we're not definitely a farm in the eyes of the council, but also city councils are far less um, familiar with agricultural planning, use, etc. So our argument is that we're a farm just like any other farm, and as a result, we should have the same breaks that a farm should have, which is advantageous because obviously every bit of money helps when running a business. But really, from a sort of council point of view, every time we've spoken to councils about this sort of stuff, they're very positive about what we do. A, because it's kind of fascinating, but B, because it's like this good story to have, and creating jobs is good as well. I think that one thing you do have to, from that sort of end of things, is obviously we're a food business, so you have to be, and food standards have to come around and say you're not trying to kill people. But again, in the way that we grow, and because we're not like we're not making, we're cutting stuff down and sending it out, not making a pesto, for example, with it. So it's very easy for us to be very clean and very safe. As you again transition towards retail, the laws are different, or the demands are different on whether you're selling to a kitchen or a consumer through a supermarket. And if you're going the consumer, to a consumer via a supermarket way, the demands on the cleanliness are much, much, much higher, very, very exacting. So there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done there if you want to be selling to consumers, specifically through supermarkets. But yeah, the councils seem very pro what we're doing. It's just interesting, I think, for them. And the challenge really is you need to find a landlord who is accommodating, because if a landlord owns a warehouse, what they'd like you to do is absolutely nothing to change the fabric of that warehouse. They just want you to put boxes in there and bring a lorry in and take a lorry out. Whereas we come along and say, can we drill a hole in the floor? Can we drill a hole in the wall? Can we put a bigger pipe in here? And so you have to find a open-minded landlord to work with on that.
Yes,
that
I can imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things. So
go on.
carry on.
I was going to say, I mean, one way to solve that is don't build it in a city. Build it in a field where you can, or maybe build the building from scratch. That sort of stuff. It solves a lot of the problems. I think it changes your business model to some extent because you can't serve those customers super close. But again, at some point, we don't want to just be stuck supplying London forever. And so, the pressures on where you build it. I mean, the first farm, the current farm that we're in is where it is because it's 15-minute cycle from where I live. Not any more than that. The next one's a lot further away. So.
And one of the things I was thinking, that with all of the changes to the numbers of people who are working in offices, that there could potentially be commercial, formerly office buildings that are now being underused, and whether a shift in use could be to do your kind of farming in those highly densely populated areas, whether that would be viable in some way.
I mean, we know people who install sort of small towers in various companies to sort of provide the people who are working there with something nice to look at, and also some fresh veg every couple of weeks. I think the key thing for what we do is, and this is like really starting to get into the nuts and bolts of it, is you want high ceilings because in London per square metre is expensive, so you want to go up as high as you can, and a lot of offices just don't have that height. It's quite messy what we do, or it can be, so you want drains in the floor, because if you don't have drains in the floor, you're inevitably going to end up with, one day you're going to burst a tank or leave a valve on where it's not meant to be left on, and all your water's going to go on the floor. So, you've got to dig the floor up in a lot of cases, which a lot of people don't want to be, and get yourself plumbed into the wider sort of water network. It's good to have good energy supply, and some buildings aren't just geared up to have the amount of energy that you require. And there's loads and loads of other things that really mean that I think you can do this work, but for it to be viable economically, if you're trying to make a business out of it, you want really high ceilings, a really flat floor, you want some drains in there, and you want plenty of water and plenty of power. We've discovered firsthand the limitations of not getting those things right. Um, and so while I think what you would end up having to do is, if you took over an office building that was underused, you'd have to knock some floors through, do some structural work, which again is totally possible, especially when if land is at a premium. But I think what some people have found as well is that, I mean, it's still farming at the end of the day, and it still requires maintenance, and it still requires someone who knows what they're doing to the grow the product to an acceptable standard. And you've got to, if you're not careful, you do have to worry about aphids and whatever else. If you don't get these things correct, what do you do if you've got a yellow lettuce? How do you diagnose that problem, and how do you solve that issue? So there's a lot of knowledge. You still need to have a grower. We haven't got to that point yet where you can just stick the kit in and everything works. We're not quite there yet, thankfully, because otherwise I'd be out of a job. But yes, it's still farming at the end of the day, and you're still dealing with something organic, which has its whims that you need to cater for, right?
Yep. I think we've already talked about the barriers in terms of energy need and the types of energy like requirements, the specifics of a building that you need. So moving on to looking at just the last year, we're really starting to see the fragility of the food supply chain in the UK, where we've had seasonal shortages because of climate change issues, and also Brexit, and all of these things all happening at the same time. Do you think that an increase in the number of vertical farm enterprises would solve these problems, or only solve some of those problems, or are there systemic issues in UK food supply that this isn't going to actually solve at all?
I mean, I think where I live, the closest shop for me to buy veg from is not a supermarket; it's a greengrocer at the end of the road, and I never saw those shortages on the shelves last year, because the small greengrocers are getting their produce through a totally different route than the major retailers are. Major retailers are also known for being very price conscious, but also are the way that the scale that they operate at means they have to seek supplies in a different way. So I think the real point, which at least in the UK you see those shortages, comes on supermarket shelves, not necessarily on the shelves of independent stores. Now, I live in the middle of London. There's a lot of those around. I grew up in the countryside. My mum lives out in the middle of nowhere, and the irony is that if you live in the countryside, you probably have less access actually to that's to independent growers than you do living in a city, because the only place my mum can go and buy her stuff from is, well, not the only place, the closest place is a supermarket. In a Tesco's, right? So we are, I mean, not to get too sort of businessy on it, but we're just about to, we're in the process of designing and building one of the biggest vertical farms in the world for our next site. That will bring us to a scale where we can tackle that problem at the level of national retailers, because a national retailer needs a certain amount of volume for them to bother, because no amount of small vertical farms, it just doesn't work. It's too many suppliers, too much inconsistency, etc., etc. I think the smaller vertical farms can tackle what we have been tackling historically, which is food service, restaurants, independent retailers. The problem is going to get worse. The supply is going to be needed across the whole of the food providing industries. So it's just about scale. if you can get to a scale where you can grow enough to supply major retailers, then I think those shortages can certainly be tackled. Um, as you've pointed out, in the near term, it's going to be on the leafy, herby side of things. As time goes on, and as the technology improves, as the technology improves, as the economics around it improves, you'll start seeing that more with the fruiting vines, right? Cucumbers, tomatoes, those peppers, those sorts of things. Um, and then hopefully we're not in a position where we see potato and wheat shortages. I mean, there are grain shortages globally that they appear to be. I don't want to get my facts wrong here. It seems to be more geopolitical issues than climate issues, maybe on something like wheat. Um, but yeah, ensuring our food supply here will help. Of course, it will. It's not going to help solve the problems of it's not solving the root causes, but it's certainly going to solve the problems we're seeing. I think that we in our small way, and I think it is a small way, we will probably lessen the small way. We will lessen at the exporting and importing of food, and agriculture as a whole is responsible for a lot of the sort of greenhouse gas emissions, carbon emissions, whatever you want to call it, in the world. That's certainly not the worst offender by any means, but it's up there. And I think we're trying to chip away at that. And as we get bigger, we can take off bigger chunks of it. But there are also very, very big problems out there that need to be tackled. Things like the generation of fertilizers, for example, is a big one. It's a finite resource in a lot of cases. It's a finite resource that has not been stewarded responsibly, and hopefully, with the way we grow things, we use less fertilizer, right? So we will help alleviate that strain. There's a lot. There's a huge number of problems to tackle, but I think the quickest one we can tackle is that supply issue, so that there won't be shortage on the shelves. And along the way, we can also take bites out of the wider environmental problems that you see through agriculture.
I think there's a lot of hope there. Actually, I think that is a positive trajectory.
Yeah, it's. I mean, there are obvious criticisms of what we do, and they are the same ones over and over again. And some of them are valid, and some of them are not valid. But it's not like we're not trying to solve them. It's just that it's a very big problem to tackle. Um, and at the end of the day, you've still got to make it a business, and you've also got to reach this critical mass of the industry has to reach this point where we have this critical mass around us to allow us to start solving those problems. The lights are a good example. The lights are key to our business, and with the invention or with the development of LED grow lights, it made businesses like ours viable. But it also helped to green up other businesses that were using sodium lamps or one of the other very inefficient ways of generating lighting. And those products are getting more efficient over time. And the only way they get more efficient is if people want to buy them and if there's money going into it. It's why, the LED bulbs that you now probably have all over your house instead of the incandescent ones are better today than they were 5 years ago. 10 years ago, they either didn't exist or they were rubbish or they were really, really expensive. Now they're cheaper, more reliable, etc., etc. So you just need it. Unfortunately, because of how these things work, it's not an immediate fix. But as more people do it, as more people get behind it, as unfortunately as the need becomes more pressing, we will make strides quicker, I think.
Yeah. When you think of the entirety, the lifespan of Harvest London, what are you most proud of?
I'm happy. I'm proud that we're still doing it. Um, when some other companies unfortunately are not. I'm proud that we still grow really good product, even though it's not like me tinkering away in the corner anymore. We've sort of, so to some extent, sort of industrialized what we do, manufacturized what we do. Um, I'm and the fact that we are now on the cusp of building a much larger, much more efficient, much more high tech facility, it feels slightly unreal to me that we're about to tackle the scale of the project that we are, because again, we were just basically in a shed to start off with. And that I've got a really great team. It's really cool having started this thing ourselves, and now we're employers, and now we've got people who are, farmers and who are running the farm, and we've got people doing this and that, and it's really quite cool having built a business, I think, and one that can still give people a job, and a sort of an interesting job and a different job, than maybe the norm. So yeah, I think I just think, and really it's that thing of seeing our stuff on people's plates, right? It's always very cool to see, and knowing that whether people know it or not, people are enjoying our product, and we've made it, and it's been through our hands. It's been through our farm, so it's really great to see, and I think that we feel, oh, that was the other thing that we offer. Your usual sort of bag of salad in a supermarket is chlorine washed, for cleanliness, and we don't have to do that. So that helps with shelf life, but also less chemicals and a generally nicer, happier crop. That was the thing I had to remember. But yeah, it's nice to know that we're offering people a product that's, we've never, one of the fortunate things for us is that we've never really had a sales problem. You get a chef round to our place and they get it like that. It's really obvious. Every time we put our product in front of someone, it tastes great, it looks great, it's super fresh. It's like it's an easy sell to people. I think there becomes a challenge of selling that product to a wider audience, where maybe maybe people don't care. Maybe the general public don't care as much about the shape of the basil leaf as I do. But undeniably, if you put if you put our coriander versus supermarket coriander, it's just better. It just looks better. I think that's an inherent thing that people know it, whether they know it or not. I think you're sort of maybe hardwired to pick out whether you work in the apple industry or not, you know what a good apple looks like versus a mangy apple. And it's the same sort of thing with us. So I think I'm proud of the product we grow. And I think it's quite amazing that we can do it in a warehouse in Leighton.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree. Are there any other people doing really fantastic things that you would love to share?
I was thinking about this. I mean, I think from a sort of industry level, I think there are people out there trying to crack this problem of packaging, because it's a big one. There's companies out there like Notpla and Tipper who are trying to develop genuinely compostable alternatives to plastic, not just ones that say they are, but genuinely ones that would break down in your compost bin at home. It's a real challenge because of the way moisture moves through packaging and gas moves through packaging to keep things fresh. But I think that way of tackling plastic waste is looking more and more encouraging. I think the challenge is convincing, as I think I mentioned earlier, retailers to actually allow that to be stocked. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done about convincing both the consumer and the retailer that these sort of plant-based plastic alternatives are useful. I think on a sort of more personal level, last year we had there's a musician called Loyal Kana who runs a cooking school for kids with ADHD, and it's called Chili Con Carne. And they came to the farm last year, and I think that was one of the most fun days I've ever had in the farm. It was fantastic. So everyone should check out what they're doing and support them in every way they can, because I think they're doing good work. And it was one of those like totally selfless, like the people doing it are doing it in such a selfless way, and you can sort of see that. It was really, really good. It was really, really, really fun having them around. So yeah, I think generally we'd like to be. Oh, we also we were at one point working with the Felix Project as well, who are a charity in London who basically take leftover food and feed people who couldn't otherwise be fed. and they were great to work with. I mean, they're obviously very happy to take any leftover food. We just don't have the leftovers anymore. But yeah, all sort of food-based charity things seem great. Whether that's sort of working with people in food or supplying food to them. But they're two we've worked with specifically who I think are doing cool stuff.
Fantastic. If you could change anything about the world, an attitude towards something, legislation,
Yeah,
whatever, what would it be and why?
I was thinking about this because obviously I'm not, don't want to pull back the veil too much, but you did send the questions through earlier, and I couldn't think of anything. And then it feels so mundane saying it, but I bought a new wireless mouse the other day, and it came with two AA batteries in the pack that are essentially disposable, right? Once they've run out, and I think disposable batteries are the worst thing. There's no way of getting rid of them that doesn't make me feel awful or is impossible, because I'm still pretty convinced if I bundle them all together and take them to the recycling centre, I don't trust what's happening to it. So I think disposable batteries are awful, is what I think, and I think everyone should move over to buy some rechargeable ones, buy some rechargeable AA batteries. They're super cheap, and you only need to buy them once for your TV remote or whatever, and use those. So that's my thing. And then disposable vapes, littering the streets with batteries everywhere, leaking into the whatever they're leaking into, I'm sure. So yeah, that I think it's probably not the thing. I don't know. It's they use rare earth minerals, etc. in there. Batteries are a big one. Making batteries is a morally complex thing, I think, probably. But yeah, just disposable ones, we don't need them.
And if you could invent anything, yeah, I totally agree. If you
Yeah.
could invent anything, what would it
Yeah.
be?
I I did, I think, and I think more readily available energy from whatever fanciful thing it could come from would be great. It would help us a lot. I think that plastic alternative that genuinely keeps fruit and veg fresh and can break down. But then the other thing I've often thought about, and I don't know if this is a stupid idea or not, but you know how microwaves make stuff hot really quickly? There's not something that's the opposite of a microwave to make something cold very quickly. It would probably be very irresponsible to have one. But I do think that sometimes I've got a newborn. I'm on my second child now, newborn child, and you, when you make a bottle of formula for them, you have to pour hot water into it and wait for it to cool down. It takes ages. You've got a screaming kid. If you could put that in something and press a button and bring it down to room temperature quick, that'd be ideal for me. And it's not just a fridge, because that doesn't do it quick enough. I want immediate cooling. So that would be my selfish, probably totally irresponsible invention. Is the opposite of a microwave.
I love it. I love how everyone comes up with different things. It's just
Yeah,
absolutely brilliant.
it's a very niche problem that I feel needs solving for a short period of my life, but
But
a
then,
lot of work. So
scaled up to millions, that's how
yeah,
these things
yeah,
work.
yeah.
That's brilliant. Well, I really appreciate the time you've given
That's a pleasure.
and your knowledge and expertise. Thank you so much for
No,
speaking
thank
to me
you.
today. Like, it's absolutely fascinating, and it's really great hearing about how you feel it fits into the bigger picture in terms of
Yeah,
nationwide food production. So
yeah.
absolutely brilliant. So thank you
Cool.
very
Well, thanks so
much.
much. It's been a pleasure.
You can find other research interviews in the Imagining Tomorrow playlist, or go to www.foe.uk/imagining tomorrow to find the episodes released so far, or go to your podcast provider of choice and search for Imagining Tomorrow. Bye!